students connected to different parts of the school, whichever part it is, be it teachers or, and I was interested in the peer-to-peer connections.
Yes.
For example, the cross-cultural cooperative learning opportunities. What might one of those look like? Like, what's an example of?
Heterogeneously grouping students is probably the most powerful way to do that. Random, you know, and again, many schools are moving certainly in that direction for certain kinds of courses, but making sure that classes are kind of represented of the ethnic and racial and language diversity of the institution, right? One of the best places I think that we see that cross-cultural interaction is on athletic teams, right? And I think we can learn a lot from that. Because when you're on the field, it's about how good you are, right? And if we can learn from those lessons and begin to create other opportunities on that campus, it would be very helpful. Because oftentimes if you go to a campus, in a U.S. context again, you'll go to a school and at lunchtime, kids are divided by race, where they sit, very clearly. And the institution has taken that as normal. We don't question it and we don't try to change it. So as educators, we have to figure out what are the kinds of activities at lunchtime or a break that begin to create opportunities for this kind of cross-cultural dialogue and understanding, right? But I think on most on high school campuses, clubs, organizations are all racially identifiable. So to what degree do we create kind of almost artificially, initially, these relationships, and then kids hopefully will take that as natural and part of what they do.
What about dividing children by their achievement? Is it common in your school to divide them in groups, right?
Yes, that is very common, but the research says that that's not the best way necessarily to achieve maximum achievement for all students, right? So if we took only the most gifted or advanced students and put them together, in our context, we tend to give them what we think are the best teachers. So those kids outperform all other kids exponentially over time because there's a cumulative effect. And so the best thing the research would suggest is that if you distribute students, the low achieving students have now role models in the class who will help demonstrate what it means to be a model student, but also it gives those more advanced students the opportunity to maybe work in small groups, and you know the best way to demonstrate your knowledge is to teach it or to tutor it. So if you get an opportunity to do that, that's well, but it really is about differentiated instruction so that a skilled teacher could be able to provide instruction both to those students who are struggling, but at the same time, students who need to have more advanced work, right? And the argument obviously is, how do we prepare teachers to be able to do that and to differentiate instruction? That's the challenge. Yes?
At UCLA, you're involved in
spilling water.
In educating and preparing future educational leaders.
Yes.
And give us an example, if you can, of a powerful learning experience for these educational leaders to be able to confront these issues that you're talking about, because many of them are not easily on the table.
Yes, good question. So if we look at the distribution of people who are in our teaching force in America, they tend to be white, and they tend to be women, and they tend to be young. But our needs in urban schools tend not to fit those demographics. So one of the most powerful learning experiences that we have in our program is our what we call a community inquiry project. We ask students to identify a particular community that they have to go in and investigate. And they do what we call an asset map. They have to identify all the assets in that community that can be leveraged at the school to increase student achievement. And so oftentimes students come with this perspective that there are very few resources or things that they could benefit from in these urban communities. But when they go out and talk to families, they realize that parents do care. They realize that parents have jobs. They realize that there are organizations in the community that would be more than willing to contribute to the schools if they were asked. So oftentimes there are resources in those communities that we are not aware of unless we go out and investigate. And so I think that's one of the most powerful learnings that these educators get, and they all talk about it over the course of the program, is about the powerful experience it was to go to a black church in South Los Angeles, or to go eat at a Armenian restaurant on, in Burbank as they prepared for their school visit. So it introduces them to a different kind of culture with a purpose. And they create that meaningful relationship with that community, and it's very powerful. One of the things I'm hoping that George might add to his course.
We saw the statistics about the litigation slave students and some immigrators and Latinos in that areas. And in the background of such situation, this curriculum reform, does it imply, did it imply to lower the standards, or what's the strategy?
Did curriculum reform imply lowering the standards? Yeah. Is that what's the question? No. What it meant in California and really across the United States was a very rigid, prescriptive curriculum reform for elementary school. So part of what it meant was that every school would have to choose from a list of curriculum reforms that they would use to improve their achievement. And many of these reforms were very prescriptive in nature, so that every teacher would be teaching the same thing in every classroom at the same time. So it wasn't about necessarily lowering the standards, but it was about creating accountability in classrooms in the elementary school grades. And there's obviously lots of controversy as to whether or not that was the right approach. Many teachers would argue that was not. Many policymakers would argue that was not. Because it really has not increased. Well, I shouldn't say that. Depends on what studies you look at would determine whether or not that was effective.
I have a question about this discipline or subject or whatever, the classes of studying skills. I mean, you were talking about the kids who are coming from poverty, from different kind of an environment.
Yes.
They are not capable. Is the idea of this subject, of this class of study skills, is still popular in the United States?
We're moving to this.